Hey, this is Todd, and I'm talking about reactions and morale and using them to shape encounters. If you are familiar with kind of old school playing the original games, reactions and morale played a big part about how parties would come across creatures, and that when creatures were sighted, either through a random encounter or through a set position, you'd make a roll against a called a reaction check against a table. The results would sort of give you an idea of how hostile or not a these creatures were, and there was sort of a small spectrum of possibilities. One from attacks right away, just incredibly hostile, to very helpful, might even join the party. And then, of course, the whole mid ground of they're cautious, but they're not quite sure what to do yet. Maybe they're mostly friendly but wary, or they're maybe mostly hostile but also wary. And so, what this did was it gave the party a lot of options. First of all, with how to deal with a particular group of creatures that they might encounter. As a referee, as a dungeon master, it gives you a lot of options to how you want to play an encounter. It's not just combat, 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 but you can really get your creativity fired up. One group of goblins may be wanting to fight to the death and be particularly bloodthirsty. Another might be sort of cowardly, think that they just want to save their own skin. Through other ones who may look at these players, these characters, as an opportunity to maybe break away from whatever they were doing before, or, advance themselves, however they may see it, and may actually want to help the party with whatever they're doing. So it gives you this whole spectrum, and of course you don't know it until you make the roll. So, it's great for keeping you in the moment and, forcing you to have to really look at your plans as they're happening, because, who knows what those roles might be. Now, they do have the rules in 5th edition, but they're sort of buried deep within the Dungeon Master's Guide. Reactions are now, they call them attitudes or conversation reactions. It's under resolving reactions, page 244 to 245 of the book. They do things a little bit differently than how they did them old school. You sort of start with what sort of angle, or if you want to look at how creatures, how you feel like their demeanor is, their attitude from the start. So basically, they could be either friendly, neutral, or hostile. And then you would roll a DC 10, I think, a wisdom check, I think it is. And you would, or you maybe just roll a wisdom check, and depending on what the DC you hit will give you different things. So, for example, for neutral or indifferent creatures reaction, if they roll kind of default 0, so no matter what they roll, they will hit this. Creatures offer no help, but they also do no harm. If they roll above 10, the creature may do something you ask it to do, as long as it doesn't have any risks or sacrifices on its own part are involved. So it might give you some free information, something else, but nothing's going to have any kind of blowback on it. And then if you hit 20, the creature will accept some minor risks or sacrifices to do something you've asked of it. So, there you have, that's for indifferent. And of course, if it's hostile, you're going to get less, right? If you hit, 0, it's just going to be, the creature's opposed to you and is going to take risks to do that. The creature may be, again, at 10, I think it's, again, it's fairly neutral. It's not going to help you, but it's not going to stop you either. And then 20, maybe it'll do something for you, but only if no risk. So you kind of get this gradation. It's not quite as extreme as the other one, because the original one, it didn't make reference to whether they were friendly to you or hostile to you. So you didn't roll on the table and say, okay, he's hostile, so I'm going to roll differently, or it's got different things. It was just a straight 2d6 roll. Now you could probably modify it if you felt like they're attacking the home of the kobold queen, the guards outside the room, I'm going to give them an extra bonus. You probably could do things like that. But for the most part, outside of more extreme, really set circumstances, you kind of just rolled the table straight. And it was really that roll that determined whether they were neutral, hostile, or friendly, as opposed to starting with a DM fiated sort of idea of, I believe that I have set that they're hostile. Now, how do they react? You roll, and the roll would tell you, hey, these are hostile. So it's a little bit different way of doing it, but they do have it. As I titled this video, sort of shaping encounters, right? So one of the things that reactions do for you is they give you the shape of the encounter. If you're rolling a reaction and you get something that's not negative, then this is not automatically a combat encounter. And that obviously changes the very nature of the encounter itself. If it's not a combat encounter, then that opens up a lot of possibilities for the players and what they can try to do. You're going from now you got to try to kill them and expend resources to maybe expending different resources to try to get them to do something that we need or get some information. It may even provide more tensions or more obstacles because now, if they were, they were going through, say, a goblin caves and they rescue some kobold prisoners and the kobold prisoners are very positive, maybe the prisoners follow them around and maybe that actually creates complications because now do the players feel like they have to protect these kobolds? Do the kobolds make noise or otherwise maybe a hindrance, not intentionally, but just through their presence create more difficulties for the players down the line? There's a lot you can do with that. And so now you've taken this, well, this is just going to be a combat encounter. And now you've, opened it up. At the same time, as anybody who's played this game has often seen, players can, create their own difficulties through mishandling situations, and reactions can play to that also. If they think somebody should just give them something and you've rolled a reaction and that person is kind of hostile. Now, hostile can mean different things, right? If you were to play out a shopkeeper encounter and you get hostile, the shopkeeper is not going to leap over with a knife and try to gut the player. But it may mean that instead of giving them book value for something that they are going to buy from the players, maybe they give them, half book value. Maybe they double the book price of something if the players are trying to buy it, right? There's a lot of ways that hostility, they could just refuse to serve them. There's a lot of ways that hostility could play out. And of course, if the player's going on a hostile situation and then make it worse, then that creates more complications and, ones that we can use to generate more content for our games in places where maybe we didn't think there'd ever be one. You might not think, unless the players are going around murder hoboing everybody in the town, that there's some tension and some conflicts in the town to work with. But in this case, you can build off that reaction roll. If you roll really hostile with a shopkeeper, then take a moment, think about why that shopkeeper might be hostile. And then maybe you come up with a seed for something down the line. Like, why might this shopkeeper dislike the party? And then how does that play out in the town? Does that reveal something about the town to the party? Does the shopkeeper then make trouble for the party? Is the party just caught in pawns? Like maybe you say, well, the shopkeeper hates the party because the party is staying at the inn and the guy who owns the inn has been enemies with the shopkeeper since they were kids. And so the party is now kind of caught between these two factions, if you will, in this town, between the tavern keeper and the shopkeeper, right? So you have a lot of ways you can play it. And if you already have these things set, you don't need to override it with a reaction roll, but the reaction roll could also be used to just inform that. So maybe the shopkeeper is normally hostile and you've kind of got that noted. Yeah, he doesn't like the party. And you give a roll to the reaction and you actually get a very positive one. Then you can think about, well, why is he positive today? Like, what does that mean? Like, is he just having a great day and he's just all smiles? Does it mean that some nefarious plot that he has is coming, into fruition? Like, why is he, why did he have this change of heart? So it's all fodder for you to use. And I think that's something that you don't get, without reactions. You either have to think of it all in your head, which then is not as spontaneous. And I feel like there's something in the creativity of being given this sort of prompt and having to run with it as opposed to creating all the prompts for yourself in your head. I felt like a lot of times I would see myself and other game masters get into a rut where all our bartenders were the same, all our shopkeepers were the same, all our goblins were the same, because we just had this one idea in our head and I just kept replaying over and over again. Having a reaction forces you to change that up, because if you have the shopkeeper always grumpy, you roll the reaction and now he's super happy and helpful, well, then he's not grumpy anymore. And maybe that becomes a new way to inform that particular shopkeeper. And you can build it into his little backstory or little notes that you may have for him. Hey, he's not grumpy, he's happy, and this is why he's happy. Did the players do something for the town and it actually really helped him out? Is he just happy for the business? Did he just get married, just have a kid? Whatever it is, right? You just got a large inheritance. Who knows? So it forces you to come up with a new character that you might not have had before when you just had sort of generic bartender. And for whatever reason, all your generic bartenders were just, grumpy old men. It's a way to kind of spice it up. So I think that regardless of what you call it, whether you call it getting an attitude, conversation reaction, just a straight up reaction, I think the book tends to have it where the reaction maybe comes at the end of the conversation. I kind of like the original old school reactions where it comes at the beginning. So that way you have this reaction that informs how any kind of interaction goes. the book seems to say is you start with this one that you as a GM choose, and then at the end, weighing what the players say, then you can see what happens. And I think you can still use that right at the end, but then maybe you inform the DCs of various things, those difficulties ratings for whatever they're asking for based upon how they do. So for example, they go in, they meet some kobolds, the kobolds roll, say, friendly, neutral, sliding towards friendly. And the players recognize this. And that's a big thing. I think you have to make sure your players recognize that. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the players recognize it. They go in, they parlay. And what they want is some information on some hobgoblins that have been, bothering local settlements who seem to be in the area. And they figure the kobolds are either working for the hobgoblins or maybe at least will know where they are. Right. So instead of just giving a blank DC, I'm going to decide that I roll the reaction for the kobold. It's mostly positive wary. So they're not opposed to helping them, but they're maybe not going to go out of there. Like it says in the conversation reactions, they may not go out of their way to help them, but this is just informational. So it's something they can give up without putting themselves in much risk. And then maybe I'll roll a little reaction between the kobolds and the hobgoblins. Maybe the hobgoblins and the kobolds get along great, and they are allies, in which case the kobolds are going to tell the players to piss off or give them some wrong information and go warn the hobgoblins, whatever they're going to do. So maybe I'll make a little side roll and just see how do the kobolds feel about the hobgoblins. So that's another reaction roll, but this one maybe behind the screen, roll some dice, and I get hostile. So in that case, if I'm going to have them roll a DC, and in this case, and like I said about skills, if they hate the hobgoblins, they seem to not be anti the party. And by hating the hobgoblins, they have reasons to want somebody to go and put them in their place or get rid of them, or at least preoccupy them. Do I really need to roll at that point to see if the kobolds give the party information to hobgoblins that at this point I've established they want them to have? From the kobolds' perspective, there's no downside to giving the players this information. They risk nothing. Either the kobolds are going to, or either the hobgoblins are going to wipe out the party, and that's, again, nothing to the kobolds if they do. The party wipes out the hobgoblins, which is good for the kobolds, or they just beat each other up and they're both weakened. All those are good outcomes. So why am I going to have a roll the dice? If I roll the dice and they don't make it, then I've sort of locked myself out of giving them this information for no reason, right? So at this point, I would probably just forget the DC. They're going to give it up to you. Now, maybe if they want some extra. So the kobolds go, oh yeah, the hobgoblins are in these hills about maybe a mile and a half west, whatever. Now maybe the players say, okay, what are the entrances and exits, or how strong, how many are in the tribe, or whatever the group, this group of hobgoblins, or more information like that. Then maybe I might supply a roll because that's extra information. That information might give something away. Maybe the kobolds don't want to tell that out. There may be some reason. So in that case, for that, since that's not sort of the basic thing, right? Maybe for that one, I might say, okay, go ahead and give me that wisdom check to see if they want to give it to you, right? So, I'm being generous. Like I mentioned in my skills video about, hey, they want to give you this information. I, as the referee, want you to have this information. Here it is. There's really no reason for them to try to hide it from you. And then if they want to go delve for a little bit extra, then I'll say, okay, give the roll. So, in that instance, I used basically 2 reaction rolls to generate this encounter or help shape this encounter of the players coming into contact with these kobolds and then using that to get information on what they're really trying to do, which is track down and eliminate some hobgoblins. Now, I mentioned as part of that, the players need to be aware that you can do this. And this is something that I think if you're starting out with a new group, or you're maybe switching GM seats, or, you're starting a new campaign, as part of that session 0, tell them, hey, I'm going to be using reactions. I'm going to be using morale. The reason is that you want to get them in the habit of not approaching everything as soon as they see something that could be hostile. I'm rolling initiative. I'm firing out the spell. I'm charging in, I'm hurling the spear. I'm firing my bow. You want to get them to play it more by ear. There's no point in having your creatures hesitate if the party's just going to jump on them every time. So you want to make sure that they're aware that you're using them, you're aware that there could be things to learn. And that might be something that either you have to train them on or retrain them or get them to really think about it in a different way. And, so that you're going to be using this extra element, which is going to give them, potential. They need to see that potential so they can act on it. If they're used to playing where every time they saw goblins, it was instant kill, you need to kind of hold them back, not hold them back, but just wind them back a little bit at the beginning, maybe at their first encounter, reiterate, hey, pay attention to how things are going to react to you. It's not just all going to be about kill. You have the potential to get information or even potential allies by playing things a little bit more loose, or, just being more flexible than just seeing everything as an excuse to bust out your combat prowess. So something to keep in mind is talking to your players, making sure that they're aware of the possibilities. Now on to morale, which again is somewhat hidden away. This time it's on page 273. Gets a slight half page of rules or of guidance. And the important thing in morale is, if reactions are sort of something you do at the beginning of an encounter, morale is that thing you do at the end of an encounter. It doesn't have to be combat encounters, but mostly it will come into play in combat. And, it's going to signify, you could check at different moments, and, the book has guidance on when you should check. You can just use your own imagination for when you think when you think a creature might rethink its position and its odds of success, and act accordingly. But the idea is that at certain moments in a stressful situation, usually combat, but it doesn't have to be, you would roll against the morale. If they fail the roll, and you can use gradations of failure, or it could be binary, kind of whatever you'd like, they're going to essentially try to get out of dodge, get away, defend themselves, whatnot. If they roll really well, then maybe they may push themselves, be even more aggressive, go in, sort of do or die. And so again, and you have the sort of middle, which might be they just be more neutral, and they're kind of waiting to see if they have that. They feel like they can hang out for another round or so and see if things pan out better. Kind of have a whole spectrum. I think the book talks about to just determine whether a creature flees, basically. And you can, they talk about, hey, if the group's got a leader, maybe the leader makes the roll, and how the leader reacts will influence or basically dictate how the followers will react. That's another way to do it. I like to have a few more of a spectrum, more of a gray area. So if they sort of on the failing side of morale, but not by a lot, that maybe they'll just try to be more defensive. So for example, if you're fighting kobolds in the cave and they kind of fail the morale, but not by a lot, they might not be quite as aggressive. Maybe they'll start backing up and start looking more towards securing their exit, but they're going to keep good order, and they're going to keep being offensive. They're not going to totally try to turtle up and just or just flat out flee, but you should notice that they've seen that their mortality is in peril. And so now they're starting to think about, how can we extract ourselves, right? And if they fail it for more, it might be that they do go totally defensive, but they're still in good order. And then at the extreme, they're just dropping their weapons and surrendering, or fleeing if they can, surrendering if they can't. On the other side, if they make it by a little bit, they're probably just going to keep doing what they're doing, but maybe I'll check it again fairly soon, because they're still unsure. More than that, they're pretty confident, but they're not unshakable. And then again, on the extreme, they are unshakable. They're unflappable. These kobolds are going to, fight to their doom. And again, it's about shaping combat encounters, because I found that you can end up in an encounter where at some point it just becomes inevitable. The party's going to have the plan figured out. They're going to be down to a couple of, of their opponents, probably have them in a static spot where they're just now trading blows. And it's really all about the math. The boss has, or whatever opponents they're fighting have a certain amount of hit points left. The party's got their amount, and they're just going to be whittling down. And at a certain point, you can just tell, unless one of these creatures has some kind of uber attack or something they can unleash to really change that math, that the party's just going to whittle them down. So why are you playing out this whole encounter? Obviously, I can just use GM fiat to just say it's over, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a good thing. If you see like, man, this guy's trapped, no way out for him, they're just going to keep beating him down. Why wouldn't he surrender? Unless he's some kind of fanatic. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Surrender. It's the same thing you would say to your party if the roles were reversed and they're fighting an intelligent enemy, and it's clear they're going to just get pummeled down. They have no way out. Surrender. Live to fight another day. See what happens. So there's nothing wrong with that. I like the roles, because I don't know, the party doesn't know. You kind of got to go with what it gives you. So maybe you get that guy in the corner and he rolls really high, and you see the man, this guy's going to be a fanatic. But knowing that he's going to be a fanatic, maybe I do something differently. maybe I just give up all pretense of a defense and have them just go wild. And at least if the counter is going to go on, it's going to end quickly because, for example, if they're fighting some orcish warriors and they've got now the last 3 or 4 and they've got them trapped and they're just kind of needling them down, and the warriors roll super high on their morale, maybe I had them just drop their shields, go, two-handed on their swords and just go as crazy offensive as they can and just use whatever they can to just minimize their defense and just push their offense right to the max because they're going for it. So again, even though it hasn't maybe changed the outcome of this encounter and it hasn't changed the shape of it in the sense that they're doing something, it's taking a direction it wasn't going to go anyway. Yeah, they're still going to get beaten down. And now it might go down in 1 turn instead of spending 4 turns as they shields and everything. Just like they're just going to go all out and they'll go down in 2 rounds and maybe they'll take down a character that they wouldn't have before because they weren't just going all out offense. So it has given a different character, even if ultimately on a broad view, it hasn't changed. And of course, if they do decide to flee, then now you're starting to think about how they could do that. Can they bust out of that corner? What can they do? Can maybe 2 of them kind of force open an entry and exit so that the third one can escape? It gives you all kinds of tactical things that now you're thinking about that you weren't thinking before when they were just going to sit there and just hammer at each other and hammer until they collapse. So you're giving the encounter a shape that's not predetermined by you or the party. It's kind of what's happening in that moment. Obviously, the other thing you can do is just cut down the length of encounters. I think a lot of times with 5th edition, I know 4th, at least before the like 4.5 or the essentials line, unless you really were doctoring with hit points and stuff, encounters could really just drag. And I felt like they would just drag beyond the point where there's anything interesting to do. All the maneuvering's been done. All the control of terrain has been done. And now you're just standing there basically statically hammering each other. And it can happen in 5th edition too. And I think that the more that you can get away from that, right? There's a certain amount of combat where you're making great tactical decisions. You're using your abilities and you're doing things. You're affecting the battlefield. You're shaping it. You're moving the pieces around. You're getting and you're doing all these things. And then that part's over. And then it becomes just the math part where you're rolling dice and you're doing the damage. And there isn't a lot of that tactical moment. You've made all your tactical moves. You've thrown down all the control elements that you can. You've done all of that. And now it's just pounding away. And there's no reason to extend that pounding away portion of the fight. It's the least interesting part of it. And if you're getting to that part, or before you get there, if you're using something like morale, if you're looking at it and saying, hey, there were 12 goblins, 6 of them have been dispatched, I'm going to use that as an excuse to roll morale because they've seen half their comrades go down. There's a good chance they're going to run now. If that saves you 2, 3, 4 rounds off of the combat, which could be a half hour, 45 minutes worth of game time because now the goblins, the rest of them either try to just run away or they throw down their weapons and they surrender. That's a net positive. Right? You want to hit that high point of combat and then get out of it. And morale allows you to do that in a way that, isn't predetermined. It's not set. The players may still have to do work. How it happens in any particular encounter might be different. But again, it lends sort of different shapes to the encounter in a way that I think maximizes the fun of the encounter without minimizing sort of the downsides. If the downsides of combat are just when that back end of it stretches out, morale could be a way to cut that short. And again, having that you're using morale, that it exists, if you think there's a situation where it's so obvious that you don't need to roll, then don't roll. If it's just obvious that there's 1 goblin left, maybe roll if you just want to see, well, is this guy the fanatic berserker goblin? But other than that, have him surrender. Cut that short, get to the best part of combat, and then get out. And so morale, helps you do that. You can also use morale in other things. You could use morale in sort of social encounters, if it's maybe bargaining, things like that. Anything where you feel like there's a change that might result in them either stiffening their stance, hardening it, or softening it. It gets them that morale. If you're running sort of a bargaining session, it's a back and forth. It's almost like a combat through social skills that might be used for, morale. You could find many applications. But I think, again, this with reaction, they're great tools for giving your encounters specific that's character that comes out sort of spontaneously through play. It forces you to be flexible and be creative, which I think are good things. It can change the way encounters can go. It can definitely cut short things like combat that can sometimes run over long, and it gives your players a lot more opportunity to use different weapons that their characters might have outside of combat. The charismatic characters can kind of step to the fore and, use that. Or even if they're not charismatic, they just have great ideas. They could use intimidation, they could use diplomacy, they could use whatever ways of getting information, put them in the habit of looking at things and not just from a combat perspective, but more towards the kind of play I like, which is how can we avoid combat? How can we save those resources when we really need it? And if we can get rid of these goblins or these kobolds, and we can do that and either get them on our side, get some information out, and do it without expending any resources, without potentially getting hurt, let's do that. And these tools work to get your party sort of in that mindset. And once they're there, that'll be something that they will learn to take advantage of, because it is a very powerful tool to be able to end combats before they begin, essentially. So that is morale, and that is reactions. Like I said, I dealt with them on sort of my hidden gems of the DM's guide video a while back, but I felt that they deserved a video on their own because I think they're really powerful, and I think that they are often overlooked. It doesn't help that they're buried, so far in the DMG, which is itself sort of optional. I wish it was more in the player's guide where you could really see it and it would really inform play like it used to, but they are still there, and you can always use rules from earlier editions or other rule sets completely, since they're sort of such separate systems and they only really run on the GM side. You don't need to use particular, DC, D20 checks if you don't want to. If you want to go back to using the old just 2D6 or some other system, you can. They'll work perfectly well, since you can really just easily bolt them on or pull them off. But I encourage you to give them a try, use them, and then let me know how they go. If you enjoy videos like these, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It helps me out a lot. I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support the show in a different way. Thanks for watching.